Welcome to Udyog Paathshala show, and this specific show is exclusively for our course on leadership lessons from Indian mythology. And I have the course creator, Dr. Samir Parekh, who don't need any introduction. So, in this conversation, what we are going to do is I'm going to ask questions as a seeker because there is so much knowledge, there is so much uh, awareness which needs to explore to use the real essence of which is available in our Indian mythology to use in our day-to-day life. We have so much rich content, but the only challenge I found is we just hear the content, and most of the time we are not able to contemplate and translate that rich content into our day-to-day work, day-to-day life. So this conversation, I'm going to, Dr. Samir, I'm going to ask you as a pure seeker that how this rich wisdom we all can utilize in our day-to-day
So, firstly, you
experience.
used a very, very important word, contemplate.
Yeah.
Actually, you're right. Uh, we've always heard stories, right? When we were small children, our grandparents told us stories, our parents told us stories, teachers told us stories. And those stories had a purpose of just keeping us engaged. But actually no one taught us to interpret those stories and understand them from an application purpose. And so that was a very important word that you used in contemplating. So I think it's great that you've asked me this question as to why do we need to look at these stories at all, is basically to contemplate on them, learn from them, and learn to apply them and make our lives better.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, this is a pure conversation to get real essence from the course and also demystify a lot of things which are still unexplored. So as the course name in itself is like, leadership lessons from Indian mythology. My first curiosity is why Indian mythology?
That's a very important question you've asked. Actually, I'll go back to Peter Drucker, right? The guru of management. And it is ascribed to him. I genuinely don't know if really he said this, but it is ascribed to him that a statement which says culture eats strategy for breakfast, right?
Absolutely.
And now let's look at Indian culture and let's look at Western culture. See, the whole ethos of how India works, we are very hierarchical in nature. Democracy, I'm not denying democracy, right? I'm not denigrating democracy, but I'm asking a very important question that if my ethos basically says that I have to be hierarchical and democracy is imposed upon me, will it really work? So if you look at the cultural framework that we work with, and if you look at the corporate culture or the corporate framework we work with, the corporate framework has been imposed upon us from the West.
Yeah.
To make India and Indian culture absorbed into Indian companies and make them therefore much more powerful is what this entire whole story is about. So when we say leadership lessons from Indian mythology, it's about linking the stories to our own culture, making them something that becomes very powerful as leadership lessons that can be used.
So there are various chapters are there, and I have gone through a couple of them, and then based on these chapters there are a few questions which I have pulled out.
Sure.
So the first one is like how can the leadership traits of characteristics like Rama and Yudhishthira can be applied in our modern day-to-day corporate leadership?
So very important. Leader, when we look at the models of leadership, right, Western models of leadership, and we see that there is something called the charismatic leader. And people have said that the charismatic leadership model is a very sensitive model and that one's charisma is what determines how the follower will behave. True. But can we get rid of it? No, you can't, because the leader is a person, has a persona, brings that persona onto the table, and you interact with that persona, right? Now, what strikes you let me ask you a reverse question. What strikes you when I tell you Ram of the Ramayana? Okay, I want you to focus on his, let's say, his character. What would you come up with?
I think giver, humble, duty bound, integrity.
Now look at these words that you've used.
Yeah.
Are these leadership words?
Absolutely.
Right? So that's the point. See, when we look at our own culture, we look at Ram, we look at Yudhishthir, and let's look at Yudhishthir. The words that come to me, right, are dharma, which means duty, fairness, upholding truth, gentleness. These are all characteristics that we are talking about. The charisma of the leader comes from his character. His character is what reflects into the team. So it is very important for us to create those role models that we can ascribe to based on our culture, based on how we are.
Absolutely.
And therefore, Ram and Yudhishthir.
Absolutely. And you just spoke about dharma. So my next leading question towards it, like, the concept of dharma or duty, how it can be integrated into our corporate traits.
So what is dharma? Dharma is duty. One of them. Right? One of the meanings. Dharma has a lot of meanings. For example, I mean, the first shloka of the Bhagavad Gita, the first word of the Bhagavad Gita starts with Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre. When Vyas was writing that, he put dharma as the first word. So it's about who we essentially are. The essential nature of who we are is about is dharma. I want you to think about G20. Now, what does G20 in G20 in India? Do you remember the byline of G20?
Yeah, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Yeah. This world is my family.
Family, yeah.
That comes to us from our scripture.
Absolutely.
Right? How does it translate into corporate dharma? One of the aspects of corporate dharma, which has now been codified and now has been put into law and so on and so forth, is corporate social responsibility. Not for the purpose of glorifying oneself, but for actually doing good in places and areas which, in general, other things can't reach. The whole concept of PPP is nothing but dharma. So these are concepts of dharma being implemented in our day-to-day life. And when we look at them two separately, both of them don't function properly. But when you unite them, the concept with the action, it becomes more powerful.
Absolutely, absolutely. You also spoke about like teamwork, collaboration, and specifically in Ramji's army. So, what are the some of the lessons which we can draw specifically in context to teamwork and collaboration when we look at Ramayana, and specifically that time when that entire army of monkeys were formed, and how collaboration and teamwork was formed. So what are the lessons which we can
first let me explain to you two different types of teams. One, I like to use these words examples, is a team of golfers. Now, in a team of golfers, everyone's doing the same thing, right? Everyone's trying to do their best, and the collective result is supposed to be the common goal. A team of salespeople, for example, is this. On the other hand, you can have a team of footballers. What's a team of footballers? A team of footballers is they have different roles, right? Yeah. A goalkeeper is not supposed to go and score goals. A striker is supposed to not defend but go ahead, and so on and so forth. Now, in all of these, what is very important is diversity, isn't it? Yeah. Whether it's golfers or whether it's footballers. Now look at Ram's team. And Ram's team has monkeys, very different from human beings, right? They have tails, they have fur. Bears, even more different, right? At least monkeys, we believe, are squirrels. Yeah, exactly, squirrels. I love that squirrel, while it's not truly inside the Valmiki Ramayana, but I love the squirrel. You know why? Because Ram personifies the impact of even the smallest contribution.
Mhm.
So acceptance of diversity, recognizing the smallest contribution,
Mhm.
inspiring different types of people with different goals to come together for a common ideal. Best example of teamwork.
Yeah,
There are mine.
and in this, like, you highlighted the contribution of each and every team member, and we have seen with various corporations, there are many designations. There are individual contributors, there are managers, there are leaders, and most of the time, the limelight is on the high performers, leaders, or maybe in some case, few managers. But individual contributors are like very rare to get into that limelight. So what are your thoughts on that?
So that's exactly what we were looking at, right?
Yeah.
That when the squirrel is being even, I mean, look at the imagery. Ram sees the squirrel passing by, and there's one of these big, gigantic Vanar who's lifted a huge piece of rock, and he laughs at the squirrel. But look at what Ram does. Ram picks it up, right? I mean, just close your eyes and imagine this. There's this whole crowd, and there's this one small little squirrel, and he picks it up, holds it in his hand, and the squirrel is holding a very small little pebble, and he strokes it, right? He gives it a kiss. He leaves it with permanent marks. The chipmunk carries the marks of the fingers of Ram. Recognition through the ages of your smallest contribution. Why? Because you did your best.
And what is the impact it has made on that little squirrel, I think,
Exactly.
So that acknowledgement and appreciation, or maybe just acknowledging somebody at the front line by a leader, it plays a huge impact.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. So now coming to Krishna, the so-called the main strategist. So if we have to look into a modern day corporate context and strategy at one place, so how we can use these learnings to approach specifically for crisis management and negotiation, because the entire episode revolves around these two critical skills. So what are your insights on that?
Let me first say crisis management. If you're looking at crisis management, what's the most important thing in a crisis? Decisions.
Yeah.
The ability to take spot decisions immediately. Now, I'd like to refer to, and I'm intentionally doing this because we started with our dichotomy between the West and the East. There is a dichotomy in the way we approach it from an application perspective, but not at the conceptual level. So let's look at the book called Think. I'm sure you've read about it, right? Yeah. The counterpoint to Blink. And if you look at Think and Blink as two parts of what we are talking about, that intuitiveness to be able to take decisions comes from an immense amount of empathy or emotional intelligence, which we all know Krishna is the top there. But the other part is also the immense amount of logic that he can bear into a particular situation. So let's look at a situation, for example, where it is believed that Krishna played a trick, right? When Jayadratha was to be killed. And the crisis was that if the sun set and Jayadratha was not killed, Arjuna had taken a vow to commit suicide. And that would have meant disaster for the entire Pandav side of the war. So therefore, he, using his so-called magic powers or possible mystical powers, covered the sun for a fraction of a second. And that enabled Arjuna to kill Jayadratha. That instant. Sometimes what appears to be a deviation from saying that the means have to be more important than the ends. Sometimes we say doing the right thing, but sometimes the getting the right result is so much bigger than the means to get it. And Krishna has the moral courage to be able to take that stand. That, I think, he doesn't answer your dilemma. He doesn't say, is means important, is end important. That he doesn't answer. But what he actually does is he puts that up in front of us and says, when that situation occurs, do you have the moral courage to be able to take a decision that sometimes goes against what society may be thinking, your immediate peers may be thinking?
Yeah. And you rightly said about like taking a decision is important, because and I this you have said in your couple of sessions, like like we never take a bad decision. It's the outcome which turn out to be bad. So I think the most crucial part of is decision making, and you spoke about Arjun also in this, which is my next leading question. So when it comes to Arjun, and there was a stage of self doubt, and in our journey of corporate, we work with a lot of corporate executives, high performing executives, and there is a moment when they self doubt, their confidence dip. There are situations which want them to be like confident, and they also cannot, and they also need to show the confidence to their team also. So how we can apply those lessons of resilient and overcoming self doubt and building a confidence, looking at Arjun's episode.
You know why I like this question is because it leads me to think about what is the Bhagavad Gita, that whole episode of advice, so to speak, or a dialogue of advice and clearing of doubts. I've been fortunate that I lived my life largely by the principles of the Bhagavad Gita, and one of the things that I've realized is that it's not a spiritual book. I mean, it is. That's a very broad statement, but it is a spiritual book. But it is also a very much a book of life, a book of management, a book of leadership. Look at the principles that he's talking about. I think I mentioned this in my module where we talked about the Bhagavad Gita, and I want to re-quote that just for the emphasis, if you will allow me. This is chapter 18, which is almost the end of the Bhagavad Gita, verse number 26. And he says, Mukta Sango Naham Vadi, Vrityutsaha Samanvita, Siddha Siddha Nirvikara, Karta Satvika Uchyate. Mukta Sango. These are qualities of a leader that he's bringing out. He's telling Arjun, look, I want you to do work with dhriti, with utsaha. Right? He's telling Arjun not to be attached to the result, but to be extremely passionate about the process of how the thing has to be done.
Yeah.
Now, when we forget the result for a minute, see, where does our fear, doubt, anxiety come from? From the result.
Result, if it doesn't go well.
What will happen? You see, where is Arjun's doubt?
Yeah. So disassociation from the result lessen the pressure.
Yeah. And it is so very important that we focus on the process and not on the result. And immediately, your ego's gone out of the game, fear's gone out of the game, regret has gone out of the game. Yeah. You are here in the now.
Yeah, and of course, so looking again, another question related to Ramji's journey, like he has always put or rather prioritize principles over personal gains, and in today's corporate context, there are situations where decisions need to be taken, and ethical decisions need to be taken. So what we can learn from those things and still take decisions which are ethically right.
So let's first understand the word ethical, and I think one must ascribe a certain amount of context to the ethical framework, right? There are certain values which are eternal. Truth is eternal, but what is truth is not eternal. It's subjective. Absolutely. And subjective to what? Subjective to the person's
own experience.
Context and the experience. You're right. So when we look at the word ethical or ethical decision making, we have to understand that we can't be Ram because Ram is unique, right? His situation is unique. But can I learn the process of making ethical decision making?
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things of ethical decision making is selflessness.
Yeah.
Giving up personal comfort for the greater good. Now, you see, Ram could have firstly rebelled against his father, and he could have said, people love me, you're making a wrong decision, I'm sorry, I am going to become the king. He didn't do that. He could have, after Bharat went and told him that that Dashrath has died, Pitashri has died, you fulfilled whatever he asked you to do, come back. For that matter, my mother, who instigated this, is also asking for forgiveness and asking you to come back. And he says no, because he says, while I will come back and I have the moral right to do that, somebody will dilute it and make that an example and use that as a precedence. And therefore, he lived for 14 years in the forest. A prince who has never even walked barefoot gave up his slippers as representatives and lived barefoot for 14 years.
Yeah. And it's a big sacrifice, and without knowing it, like what path a person has taken. Yeah, absolutely right. And leading to that, we are talking about Ramji. So obviously, Sita Mata comes into picture, and in your course, you have given a completely a different outlook to Sita Mata, like a character who has been resilient, handled adversity. So, what are the things which we can learn from Sita Mata's experience and the narrative?
I'll take you to the Agni Pariksha, the test by fire. And a lot of people feel that there was no reason for him to do that. Sita, actually, Ram suggested. Ram knew and said, I know you to be pure, but the world doesn't. There is an interesting parallel to this. It says that Caesar's wife must be seen to be honest, right? Not only must she be honest, but she must be seen to be honest. Now, Sita's Agni Pariksha, she instructed Lakshman to get the wood, not Ram.
It's her choice.
It was her choice. Why? It's a choice of knowing and understanding that if she has to sit by Ram to rule with him, not only is Ram's acceptance important, but the acceptance of the general population is equally important for that position.
Absolutely.
So not only must I be honest, and I think this is a message to a lot of people in power today in our present situation, as to what they do with power. Do they ascend to that powers after cleansing themselves in fire? Most are probably not. So when we look at leadership and we say, if leadership even has been thrust upon you, are you actually cleansing yourself?
Absolutely. We have spoken about Ramji, we have spoken about Sita Mata, and obviously Hanumanji, who is considered as an epitome of servant leadership. What are the few things which we can learn from that entire episode and apply in day-to-day practice?
So the stuti, the
specifically
praise,
in context of servant leader,
the praise of Hanuman, Manojavam Marutatulya Vegam Jitendriyam Buddhimatam Varishtham. Right? Manojavam Buddhimatam Varishtham. Let's look at those two words, Jitendriyam and Buddhimatam Varishtham. He has conquered his indriyas. Now, look at this. That presupposes a very strong mind, which can control what the senses do. You see, I want to move away from the Purans for a minute and go to the Upanishads. And in a beautiful part of the Kathopanishad, the god of death, Yam, is explaining to Nachiketas, a 12-year-old who is an intense seeker. So he said Jitendriyam and Buddhimatam Varishtham. Buddhimata means wise, Varishtha means greatest of, right? So he is the greatest of all the wise people. Now, your question was in terms of the
servant leadership.
Servant leadership. Just put this in juxtaposition. And when you say servant leadership, by definition, one of the things that must come out is humility, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, he is the greatest of all wise people. He is completely in self-control. He has his senses don't allow him to run away. And in that, to continue that story of Nachiket, Yamraj very clearly indicates that this body full of senses, 5 senses that are input devices, 5 senses that are output devices, are under control of your mind, which means he can make himself do anything that he wants, and yet he leads by humility. He leads with values, he leads with devotion, he leads with loyalty, he leads with dedication. He leads. People look up to him. They go and ask him, Hanuman, what do you think we should do? But it is only when he is asked that he speaks. That is Hanuman.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing it. My final question is, looking at the entire course, it has really come out very well, and thank you for simplifying this entire mythology in the very simplest way for any common person to understand. My final question is, a normal executive, let's say starting from executive, I'm not even talking about a leader or manager, a normal executive, how they can develop their personal leadership philosophy, if you have to summarize the entire course and draw some principle to apply personal leadership philosophy for an individual.
Wherein I like to call it not personal leadership, but I would call it personal empowerment. Making oneself more powerful to grow in the direction that I want to grow. I think we would need to be grounded in our own roots, which is why Indian mythology, grounded in our own stories, which is why Mahabharata, Ramayana and the Purans, stories that we have been familiar with. But interpreting them in modern context, understanding how they apply in our day-to-day living, in the way in which we work in our corporate teams, in our corporate individual roles, taking those learnings, applying them with our feet firmly planted in our Indian culture.
Yeah.
Looking at common good greater than personal good, working in teams, working with values. Each person in whatever role he is in, wherever he is working, whether he is an executive, an individual contributor, or a leader having a large team, all of us can grow. And in that growth, these are things that help us.
Absolutely.
Actually, Viren, I would like to close this by saying that and thank you for saying that I have made things simpler. What I would actually say is, this should be the start of the journey for those who have gone through this course. Because I think by going through this, if you and I have made people interested enough to go back to the actual scriptures, start reading them, and you don't have to read them in Sanskrit. You can read them in translation, but contemplating on them, the journey actually starts now, because the immense amount of work that we have in the sort of scriptures and the texts, and then moving from the stories to the philosophies, it's such a beautiful journey.
Absolutely.
Not only for own's growth and making everybody around us grow more.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you once again for sharing all the words of wisdom. And those who have gone through the course and watching this interview, I'm sure this would have summarized all your questions and doubts which were there. But it's still, in case if you have any question, there are comment section below. Use it to raise your question, and we will pass on to Dr. Samir for his further um, words of wisdom on those questions, if there are any. And if you are watching it on any of our social channel, this, trust you me, this is one of the rare literature which has been simplified in a most effective way, and not only simplified, but actions which are given, which you can apply in your day-to-day life. Do subscribe to the course, and do share in your network the rich wisdom which is already there in our country and being simplified by Dr. Samir Parekh. Thank you so much for watching this video, and wish you a great success. Any ending words, Dr. Samir, from your
I think you've summarized it very beautifully. All we could tell people is, please go through this with a contemplative mind, an open mind, and look inside to get solutions outside. Namaste.
Thank you so much.